All right, so we just came up to this bathroom, and as you can see from looking around, it's a beautiful, awesome bathroom. We gotta capture that. I've spent maybe the last 5 or 10 minutes trying to find an interesting composition, and it's really difficult. If I stand in a corner and shoot pretty wide to get everything, it's not so interesting. If I stand over here and get like a 1-point perspective shooting this way, again, not that interesting. It might be great if I was shooting for like a vacation listing or a realtor, somebody who wants to see everything, but those are kind of boring photos. So we're shooting architectural photography here, a photograph of architecture, not a piece of real estate. I want to translate the architecture of this bathroom into a photograph. How am I going to make this feel like the architect intended when he designed it? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 15 or 20 minutes, we actually spend more like, again, 20 minutes digging to find the right composition that shows the architecture of the house, the mood of the bathroom, and some of these amazing fits and finishes that are inherent in here. So as you look around, obviously there's a lot to consider here. But what I chose to do is basically ignore 90% of it and reduce this bathroom down to the most simple elements. I want to create an image that makes you want to get into this bath right now. You're going to see that, and you're going to see the mood in that photo, and it's going to be dripping with soft light, and it's going to be graphic and interesting, and it's going to pull you right in. That's what I want to do. So like I said, I'm going to ignore 90% of this bathroom and make something really graphically interesting. Again, that reflects what the architect designed, not so much a purely informational photo, which just tells me what is there. So of all these test shots I've taken, the one I like the most isn't even in the bathroom. I think the most workable, interesting photo is going to be from in the hallway shooting into the bathroom. So let's head out to the hallway and start working on this image. So here we are out in the hallway after about 20 minutes of searching for this shot. I've got the camera pretty low, I've got some great leading lines, I've got the door and the vanity leading me right in, I've got this beautiful bathtub which is mirrored by the architecture and window above. So we've got a lot working for us, and we're going to light it in a really cool way, which is going to scream, get me in that bathtub right now. But as usual, we first have to do our staging, tweaking, styling, and dial everything in before we make the finished picture. We looked at a lot of different lens combinations when we were trying to figure out how to shoot this. We looked at 17 millimeters, 24 millimeters, 35 millimeters, all tilt shifts, but I ended up settling on the 24. And this is a great time to explain the benefits of why you need a tilt shift when you shoot architecture. So I'm going to use my camera's video mode to demonstrate the importance of a tilt shift when shooting architecture. It would be nearly impossible to get this picture without using a tilt shift lens. I have the camera exactly where I want it. This perspective shows me the woodwork on the vanity, the door, and the tile all in one. But without shifting the lens, what I get is this pretty goofy composition that feels very off-center. But when I shift it, I keep the perspective the same and change the field of view using a tilt shift lens. It becomes centered, and you get those amazing leading lines out of the vanity that leads you right into the tub. Again, this is without shift, and this is with shift. And some people say, well, why don't you just move the camera? And here's what happens. If I move the camera over, that vanity starts to dominate the frame, right? And if I put, and again, we're going to lose some of that, the shower, which is a great leading line up there. So I put the camera back where I had it, and then shift. I think I get a much more open composition. And again, you can see when I go back to regular with no shift here and move over, that vanity blocks the tub and the table on the tub, and we lose the shower. So again, I'm going to put the camera here, and I'm going to shift. That's going to open up that whole right side of the photo and give me the perspective that I want. So now that we have our shot dialed in, as usual, it's time to stage and style. What we have to do here is pretty simple but really important. So what I want to do first is I want to take care of this towel right in front of the camera. I want to make sure that's as perfectly folded and fluffed as possible. Then I want to work back, make sure that everything on the table over the tub is looking really good. We can see it all. We've got the candle, the soap, and the wax back there. It was like a sponge thing. And then over the tub, we've got some personal things that I kind of want to clean up. I want to space out nice and evenly. So this is a really simple shot, but because it's so simple, everything has to be staged completely perfectly to have full effect. So like I said, this is all set. Camera's dialed, composition is good to go. Let's make sure everything's looking great. One of the reasons I use the camera ranger for everything is styling. This mobile live view is just indispensable. So I can see exactly what I'm doing and move things and get live feedback and get them just where I want them with the Cam Ranger, which was more or less impossible before. So invaluable. So we're just going to space this out a bit. I like that. Like I'm just kind of go, again, as minimal as possible. There we go, I'm loving that. Distilling it down again to the most simple elements. We've got matches, we got candles, we got a flower in here. It's simple, it's clean, it's kind of like a little Zen moment in here. And that's what I want to capture. So again, I'm taking things out like crazy on every shot that I take. All right, so everything's finished. Let's take a test shot and see how it looks. So looking at that last shot, everything looks really good, but the light is a bit muddy. I want to clean it up. I want to create an amazing, sexy light that just drips off of everything that, again, is inviting. It pulls you in rather than a muddy kind of brown daylight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our first light of this tutorial. We're going to be using a Profoto B1 with a Profoto collapsible beauty dish on it. And what we're going to do is going to put that out the window behind the bathroom here. And it's going to come in with that nice, beautiful light and wash over everything and give great mood, texture, and depth to this scene. So again, we're photographing architecture. We're not shooting a hotel or something crazy. I want to somewhat respect the light that was designed into this space. Now, if you go back and you look at the earliest architectural photographers, even they used lights and their clients were totally okay with it. So it's something that's been going on forever. You're using lights to enhance and embellish, not to completely fabricate the house. So what we're going to do, again, put a light outside, 90 degrees from the tub. It's going to come in and give depth and texture. If I were to come in and bounce that light like you might for, say, a real estate thing, it's going to flatten everything out and undo everything that we just worked so hard to get perfect. So just to give you an example of how much mood this is going to create, what we're going to do is I'm going to have Adam bounce the light like I might for a stereotypical real estate shoot or something. And then after that, we're going to show you how much the mood is improved by putting the light out the door, perpendicular to and low, so that we get that beautiful light raking across the subject. So here we go. First shot. So as you can see, that's the bounced light that we introduced in the last tutorial that many people use when they're doing run and gun real estate. It's bright, it's white, it's clean, it's fast, but there's no mood whatsoever. It's like the squeaky clean whiteboard waiting to be drawn on. It drives me nuts. So what we're going to do is add some really interesting light here and make a much more interesting photograph. So in order to create this so-called mood, I need to make everything a little bit darker. Shadow is totally okay. I'm going to increase my shutter speed, and what that's going to do is bring down the ambient light level in the room. We're going to go from 1 second to, say, maybe a quarter of a second or a fifth of a second, and we're going to see how that looks. So that's looking pretty dark, and now I'm going to use that beauty dish to add light and interest to the tub. So we're all set. We're staged. Composition looks great. Time to add our light and see what happens. This is 6.0 power on the flash out of 10. And it looks pretty good. It's a little bit dark, but what I want to do here is brighten it up. So let's see if we can go to 7 on that flash. Looking a lot better. I'm going to knock down the ambient even further to get some more mood. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to go 1 stop faster on my shutter speed. I'm going to go from 1/5 to 1/10. And I'm going to try to go even further. We'll go to 1/20th to knock down some of that window exposure. Now we're looking pretty good. So let's take a look at the 3 sort of finished images that we have. We have this one with the bounced light. Looks really flat to me, kind of washed out, too bright. We've got our natural ambient only picture, which I think is pretty nice, but honestly, I think there needs to be more mood in it. So what we did, we put a light outside. This is personally my favorite of the 3. We've got nice crisp light coming in. It's modern, it's edgy. So of these 3 images, my favorite is the one with the light out the door. And there's the most shadow in that. And a lot of photographers might not be comfortable with these dark shadows, but you have to remember, shadow is what creates depth. It's what creates texture, and it's what guides the eye through the frame. If there's no shadows at all, the eye doesn't know where to go. It's like looking at a piece of paper. So by adding these shadows, we've created real depth and interest and a place for the eye to move through the photo. And for all those reasons, this is definitely my favorite shot. So if you're trying to make a really simple shot sing, you want to make it awesome, you want to make it a little bit romantic, don't be afraid to add some shadows and highlights with a light at an oblique angle to the subject. So as my final thing here, I'm going to bracket exposures from 0 EV all the way up, +3 and down -3. So that's a total, I think it's a 6-stop range from 0. So here we go. And this will give us a nice range of dark to bright that we can brush in Photoshop to make our perfect final image. And by the way, these are all without flash, natural light only. And that being said, now that I've bracketed these, let's jump into Photoshop and put this together. Okay, so we just wrapped up on location in the bathroom, and it was pretty tough to find our composition, but I really love where we ended up instead of taking a typical real estate shot or something. This is going to be a relatively simple shot to put together in post, but for the first time I'm introducing a concept that I really love to use in my architectural photography, and that is blending shots with only natural ambient light with shots with flash. So what I've got in front of me in Lightroom, as usual, are my bracketed shots from way underexposed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up until way overexposed. And as has been the case with this house, because everything is white inside, the lighting situation is not too tricky. It looks like we're gonna get away with using only one of these bracketed ambient exposures. That here is the center one. Now I wanna talk a little bit about these flash exposures before we start editing. What I really love about these, and the reason I'm using these, is that they add a lot of depth compared to those ambient only exposures. If I look at these flash exposures, it actually looks like there is distance between the camera and that back wall. And it looks like, you know, things like that shelf, for example, it looks like it actually pops off the wall. Whereas with the ambient light exposure, things are just a lot flatter. There's no real shadow to differentiate between the foreground and the background. Whereas with this flash, what happens is we get a little bit of shadow, a little bit of highlight to pull us through that image, something to focus on. Again, I really love the dynamic that this adds. I think we did a great job with that. So what I want to do is kind of take the best of both worlds. I like the bright natural light feel right here, but I also like the depth, color, and contrast that this flash adds. I've already gone ahead and done my usual corrections in Lightroom. I've pulled down the highlights and pushed up the shadows. And as you know, you already have these JPEGs, which are exactly the same as the files I'm going to use when we start editing this in Photoshop. So let's go ahead. I'm going to choose this flash shot, and again, our middle exposure. We're going to export those to Photoshop, open them up, and get to work. All right, so here we are in Photoshop. Just so you get this drilled into your head, I'm going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and I'm going to browse to our bathroom image folder, which is on my desktop. It's going to be wherever you saved your tutorial. I'm going to go to the bathroom, and I'm going to go to Flash and Ambient. I'm going to select both of those, Open, and I'm going to uncheck both of these boxes, and I'm going to click OK. That will automatically stack these layers in Photoshop so that they're ready to go for us. All right, so as you see here, we have our flash layer and our ambient layer. And before we get started, I just kind of want to make a game plan for us. It looks like I said, I like a lot about this flash layer, and there's a few things I like about this ambient layer as well. If I look at this ambient layer, what I see is that I really like this natural kind of reflection on the ceiling. With the flash layer, we don't get that, so while the bottom of the frame is really interesting and has a lot of motion and dynamic, the top is kind of flat in this flash layer. As you can see, there's no real depth to it, but in the ambient layer, we do get that natural reflection, that natural shadow, so I'm going to bring some of that back in. I also like how soft the foreground is. With the flash layer, it's a little bit harsh, a little bit too dark for me up here, and the shadow is a bit much, so I'm going to try to mellow that out using the ambient light. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip these. I'm going to click and drag that flash layer onto the bottom, and I'm going to leave the ambient layer on top. So I'm going to add a mask to this ambient layer. I'm going to Alt-click on this Add Layer Mask button down here. I'm going to add a mask filled with black. And I'm going to select a big soft brush, so I'm going to make it bigger using bracket right, and I'm going to make it nice and soft, and I'm going to put the opacity up here, put the opacity at about 30%. You can either drag the slider, or when you have the brush selected, you can just use your number keys. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 0, and 0 is 100, 10% is 1, obviously, 2 for 20%, 3 for 30%, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to switch my foreground color to white to reveal, and what I'm going to do is at 30%, I'm going to just start painting in some of this ambient light. Again, I love the sort of natural reflections and natural shadows and highlights around the edge of the frame that ambient light provides. I don't want to go over this bathtub area because I really love, again, the depth in shadow that really adds mood to this shot. I'm going to do a little bit in here just to make it feel a bit more natural and a bit less flashy. All right, so there's the ambient light that we've added in, and as you can see, it kind of makes things feel a bit more natural, a bit more relaxed, and not so harsh as if it's only lit with just flash. Now, I feel like overall this shot is a bit darker than the other ones, and since I'm delivering these as a set, I kind of want them to match. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to selectively bump up the exposure in some parts of this image, and this is another way that you can use curves. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to go to the adjustment layers button here, and I'm going to select curves. And instead of using this to adjust the white balance, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click and drag on that curve, and you can drag it up or down to brighten or darken the exposure accordingly. And I'm going to go to, I think that looks pretty good, right about there. I like it a bit brighter, and because there's a mask already built into this curves adjustment layer, I can select my brush, switch my foreground color to black, and I can kind of paint out some of that excessive hotness on the edge of that tub. Since it was already lit by flash, it doesn't need to be brightened up so much as the rest of the image. So what we have is a nice bright image using a combination of ambient and flash, whereas if I take away the curves and the ambient layer, it looks much, much different. So I really like where we've come so far. Now, I do want to correct the colors. There's a bit of funkiness going on up here. There's like a purple, yellow, this whole zone, and there's a little bit of a blue, red, kind of a mess everywhere we look. So instead of using curves to correct my color, I'm going to make a new adjustment layer, and this time I'm going to choose the hue and saturation option. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little hand tool right here, and that will allow me to click and watch. If you watch over here, as I click, it's going to select the color that I want to desaturate. So, and as I move that to the left, you can see the reds kind of get sucked out of this image. And if I do it again, say over here, now the yellows get sucked out of this image. So what we're getting is a nice gray white wall rather than one that kind of has a color cast. If you turn this on and off, you can see it. But the problem is it kind of makes the rest of the image dull. When you desaturate the yellows and the reds, what happens is your woods tend to lose a lot of vibrancy, and you can see the same thing happening outside with the trees. So what I'm going to do is, again, because this is an adjustment layer and has a mask built in, I'm going to select my brush, make sure my foreground color is set to black. I'm going to put the opacity at 100%, and I'm going to actually paint out and remove some of that hue and saturation layer adjustment on areas where I think it's actually hurting the image. So this wood, I really like to warm that up. I think the exterior should be nice and bright in green and yellow. So I'll paint out some of that. Again, I can use backslash to see where I'm actually painting with this, just to give us an idea of where the mask is at any moment. And I want to come in here, and I want to remove it from this wood down here. Maybe the flower there. I'll make our brush a bit smaller. And I'm going to go all the way across on that shelf. And as you can see, if I turn that mask on and off, you can see how much it affects the wood. So I like our wood to be warm and kind of vibrant, not dull and desaturated. So now that's one way you can correct the color, and as you can see, it's made it much more white, much more tolerable. It's not completely white and sterile. I don't want to go too far from it because, as is natural, a room like this will have a little bit of colored light bouncing in, but I want it to feel more white and less kind of funky and all over the place. So I've made a color correction using the hue and saturation adjustment. I've added some curves to brighten up the image. So we're looking pretty good so far, but there's one thing that really jumps out at me that doesn't go with the rest of the image that I really want to fix. What I want to do is I'm going to use a mask and some transform tools that we've already used to fix this crooked painting. Unfortunately, there were 4 or 5 cameras rolling at one time and tons of people going in and out, and at some point this picture got bumped and I never noticed it on location. Since everything else is nice and straight and aligned, and this one painting is just off by a few degrees, it really sticks out. So it's a quick and easy fix. I'm going to show you how to do that, like I said, using tools that I've already taught you. What I'm going to do is use the lasso tool, polygonal lasso up here. You can hit L or click on it to select. And we're going to come in, and I'm going to make a selection going right down the edge of this door. Be sure not to touch any of the door, but go right between the door and the painting. And I'm going to come out nice and wide around the edge of that painting here. And I'm going to close the selection. When you get to the end, you'll see that little circle, and that means you're ready to close it. Click on it, and you'll get these dotted marching ants. Now that we know that our selection is ready to go, I'm going to hit Shift, Command C, or Shift Control C if you're on Windows, and Command V. And what that's going to do is copy everything below our selection and paste it to a new layer. Now that we have that new layer, we can rename it Painting. And if you Command click on this layer icon, or Control click if you're on Windows, Photoshop will remember, you can see that little selection outline right there on my mouse. Photoshop will remember the selection that you made to create that layer. You can click to reactivate it, and now we're back in business with those dotted marching ants of a selection. Now that we have that selection, I can go ahead and click Add Layer Mask. What this is going to do is make a mask around that selection so that we can edit this painting without affecting any other part of the image. Now, since I know I want to rotate that painting, what I want to do is keep the mask in one place so that when I rotate it, the mask doesn't move and does not affect the door. So what I'm going to do is unlink these layers. This will ensure that when I rotate the painting, the mask stays put. So I'm going to click this button here to unlink the layer from the mask. I'm going to select the layer and hit Command T, or Edit Transform, and I can just select Free Transform and move my mouse out here, and all I'm going to do is click, drag, and rotate that painting so that it's nice and straight. And as you can see, because of our mask, we've kind of cut out and made almost a little three-dimensional mask here behind the door so we can rotate that painting without affecting anything else. Once we have the painting where we want it, we can hit Enter. And as you'll see, this is looking much better, but there's still one problem, and that is this little sliver here from when we rotated it away from the door. I'm just going to hit Command T again. I'm going to grab this corner, and I'm just going to pull that up so it covers up our little error. Now, that was really simple and gives a pretty much perfect result, but what I'm going to do to make it totally invisible is activate the mask by hitting backslash, come over here, click on the mask so we can edit it, select my black brush to hide, and I'm just going to give that a nice soft edge so that there's a seamless transition from painting to wall. And now it looks like we totally straightened that painting and affected no other part of the image, and if you hadn't seen us do that, there'd be no way you could ever tell. At this point, I'm quite happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of contrast. Again, I'm going to hit Select New Adjustment Layer, Curves, and again, I'm just going to use a default here. I'm going to use Linear Contrast, just to give it a little bit of punch, a little bit of contrast, and after that, the last thing I want to do is Command-Alt-Shift-E, flatten everything to a new layer. I'm going to rename that Final. I'm going to drag out my rulers. Make sure all my vertical lines are nice and straight. As well, again, because this is a one-point perspective, our horizontal lines have to be straight. So I'll drag out the rulers to a couple horizontals here. I'm going to hit Command-T for Skew, or again, Edit, Transform, Skew. And I'm just going to zoom in, and I'm going to skew this so that all of my horizontal and vertical lines match those rulers. All right, so I've gone ahead and straightened and skewed this image. I'm going to go ahead and save it, and this is going to be our final image. I really like this shot. I love our composition, and it was a great little lesson, a nice intro into blending ambient exposures with flash exposures, and using the little tips and tricks in Photoshop to fix problems that you have on location, like that crooked painting. If you master these tools, those fixes can be so super easy, and no one will ever be able to tell that you've done them. That being said, Let's go get ready, go back on location, and get ready to shoot our twilight exterior photo.